Okay, welcome. It is February 19th, and we're here for another HAF Reacts. I am in my kitchen because it is cold and raining, and it will bleed through and ruin the sound. And hence, hat, sweatshirt. Apologies for everyone. So let's get into it. We got one thing we're going to talk about today. It is, I will bring this up and share. Here we go. So, India, per the U.S. State's Attorney's Office, Southern District of New York, Indian national pleads guilty to plotting to assassinate U.S. citizen in New York City. This is what we're going to talk about today because it is worthwhile talking about. And Samir, you want to give an overview of what has happened?
Yeah, sure. So this, of course, involves our favorite topic, or at least my favorite topic, Khalistan. And specifically, the details are: I think there was initially an indictment. I think now it's been almost 2 years of an Indian national, Nikhil Gupta, who was allegedly plotting a assassination attempt on the face of the Khalistan terrorist movement, extremist movement, Gurpatwant Singh Pannun, who is the leader of Sikhs for Justice, a banned organization in India and wanted on both terrorism charges and other unlawful acts. And this, I guess, has now just come to the point where he has pled guilty, this individual, Nikhil Gupta, and he was allegedly working with somebody who used to be part of Indian intelligence services or within the government, who's no longer there apparently, and Indian government at a high level has acknowledged that that person was involved, but was not directed from above. We don't know what to read into or what is true and what's not true. I think for all, for our purposes, we're glad, first of all, that, the federal government and the Justice Department has done its job in, stopping any plots on U.S. soil. I think that's obviously a good thing. At the same time, I think there's a lot of nuance to the larger narrative that is building around this case, right? So there's the issue of transnational oppression, which we are all against. And then there's a narrative of, okay, every person hiding behind a bush is a proxy of a foreign government. And in this case, the Indian government and Hindu Americans are all involved in these plots and are driving around in SUVs, et cetera, and are acting at the behest of the Indian government and even Indian intelligence services. So that's, I think, the danger in the narrative that's building around this issue, and that propagates and gives fuel to the fire for a lot of these transnational repression bills that have circulated in different states and at the federal level now. And which basically have very, very vague and unconstitutional language around defining who is a proxy, what type of activity and speech is allowed, and actually harming American citizens, while TNR ostensibly trying to address TNR is supposed to protect American citizens. So the big issue is that, we just don't want to be considered proxies. We don't want the community to be demonized or labeled or treated with suspicion just because of this incident that's occurred. Again, we applaud the guilty plea and Justice Department's action and the FBI's action in this case. At the same time, it's also important to recognize how Gurpatwant Singh Pannun was described as, yeah, maybe he was a victim, but as just some advocate for
Yeah.
the separate state of Khalistan, when in fact, the Khalistan movement is a terrorist movement and has been designated as, and multiple organizations have been designated by the U.S. government, Babbar Khalsa International, as well as International Sikh Youth Federation, and many other countries have similarly designated such organizations as terrorist organizations. And there is a well-documented track record of Khalistani terrorists, committing heinous acts of terrorism, committing aviation terror, which killed 329 people on board of an Air India flight from Canada in 1985, killing thousands of innocent Hindus and Sikhs in the state of Punjab in India through bomb blasts, assassinations, murders, pulling people off of buses. And then you obviously see, the actions of Khalistani thugs here in North America and the US and Canada going after anyone that criticizes the movement, including prominent Sikh leaders who have been physically assaulted and attacked for speaking out against the movement. And of course, Hindu Americans have been, attacked, harassed, and our temples have been vandalized by proponents of the
Yeah.
Khalistan movement.
Yeah. Suhag, thanks for coming in midstream on this. I just want to go in on some of the things Samir was saying here because we'll get on to the TNR aspect of it and bills coming up. But, I just want to, first of all, clear away a text that came in from my son. But I guess the thing for me is allies shouldn't be going around trying to assassinate political opponents on each other's territory, full stop. So I can't go back that for the Indian government in any way on this. However, at the same time, to go on with some of the things Samir was saying, the FBI really seems to be downplaying what's going on here, or at least who was targeted. And let's just set the stage on this. It says, quote here, if we can get my cursor, yes, U.S. citizen became a target of transnational repression solely for exercising their freedom of speech. What was being advocated here actually plays a role. It was freedom of speech. This man's made credible or at least plausible threats against Air India recently. And, they're not just talking about Punjab seceding from India. You show their maps, they're going all the way up to Delhi, including it. If you read it in the original language, not the English sanitized version, it says Delhi will be Khalistan. So India's got a reason to be angry at this guy going onto U.S. soil again to do it when U.S. are allies and one could extradite or do things like that if they had an actual case against him is a different thing. And where was it? There was another quote in here. Let's just leave it at that and then move on. Suhag, what are your thoughts coming in on this while we're mid discussing this on this case?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I was late. My microphone was not working, but I just think that the press release leaves a lot of important details out for context. I think, I agree that allies shouldn't be engaging in, targeted assassinations or whatever. But I think to ignore kind of the underlying violence and criminality that's associated with the individual that was a target, I think that's an important piece of the story, and more people need to know about it because um, there is actual violence that's being faced by the Hindu American community as a result of this movement. And so, if people don't know about it, and certainly if the FBI doesn't know about it, there's not really much hope in us getting justice when individuals are assaulted or temples are vandalized or what we've seen in Canada getting beyond just vandalism, but actual assaults, attempted murders, all that sort of stuff. We don't need to get to that point here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sorry, I just want to jump back in before we get to Raj, who is going to be witty and funny and sarcastic as
Great.
usual.
Now you're setting up expectations, right?
We're not feeling it today, it seems.
No, we just haven't gotten to him yet.
Yeah, we just haven't gotten to it
yet. Two important things that I think just kind of going along those lines are one, this victim Gurpatwant Singh Pannun has openly acknowledged that his associates were involved in operations that involved drug trafficking and violent crimes. There was, of course, a famous Stockton operation, Stockton, California, where there was, a number of people were busted. And we've discussed that incident on our past episodes, so I won't get into it. But nonetheless, people were, were arrested for organized crime activities, and those people, Gurpatwant Singh Pannun, the victim of this, alleged assassination attempt, was actually clearly, openly saying that these people are affiliated with him and they're part of his organization, some of those that were arrested. So why isn't there a further investigation into him and his activities and what his links are, right? Yeah. Yes, two things can be equally true. One, we should not be having TNR in this country, and good, the Justice Department did its job here in foiling that plot and also, pursuing that through this recent case. At the same time, are they, and if they're not, why aren't they investigating this guy's links to actually illegal activities? Forget about what India maybe is looking at him for, but on U.S. soil, there's clearly too many links to people that he's associated with within the organized crime, orbit or networks, not to be looking into that further and actually openly saying, yes, these people may be, part of this larger Khalistan network, and there may be a lot of interplay between these two networks. That's number one. Number two, we keep talking about foreign interference. It is, again, well documented that Pakistan intelligence has been involved in the Khalistan movement more broadly. Are U.S. officials, the Department of Justice, looking at foreign interference when it comes to Pakistan's activities and potentially supporting Khalistani groups here, up to and including Gurpatwant Singh Pannun and Sikhs for Justice, right? I mean, he's gone on to offer like large sums of money for activities, different activities in India. Where is he getting this money from? Is anybody investigating the money trail, right? A victim
$1
can
billion.
be, yeah, exactly, $1 million. A victim can
Billion,
also
a
be
billion with a B. He offered $1 billion.
a billion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
$1 billion.
A person can be a victim and a criminal at the same time. So I'd like to see some, attention and time and, resources being put into them and what his potential involvement in some of these organized crime networks that are potentially intertwined with the Khalistan movement are as well. And with that, I'll
To
shut up.
Samir's point, when you said that there's a map of, that he's posted a map showing that Khalistan goes all the way up to Delhi. What's interesting is it doesn't actually go westward or northwards towards Pakistan, where actually large swaths of actual Punjab still are. So definitely.
I mean, I think the point, to Samir's point about drug traffickers, Nikhil Gupta is described by the FBI as being an arms trafficker and drug dealer and stuff, which is sort of like, if they were true about it, it'd be like arms trader, drug dealer, arrested, pleads guilty because he was hired to kill another one of those. So this is just like, it blows my mind. Raj, the floor is yours. Hold forth, man. Hold forth.
Well, I mean, if this press release, I mean, if you're going to look for any type of resolution or anything that's going to be really satisfying in terms of a government response to Khalistan, of course, you're not going to find it. And, I think even Pannun will have some things to be pissed off about, because after all, it does describe him as a U.S. citizen of Indian origin.
Oh.
And it describes Punjab, it spells it Punjab, and it describes it as a state in northern India. And
but not Indian-occupied Punjab.
Not Indian-occupied. And he refers to Sikhs as an ethno-religious minority group, which to me is very interesting because, like, I know a lot of people think that, but, like, I've grown up around a lot of, like, Sikhs who are not of South Asian origin. So it's definitely not, like, an exclusively, like, Indian or South Asian religion, at least from, my personal experience. But, I think I get that the DOJ, they wanted to win their case, so they're going to ignore anything that they see as irrelevant, right? So for them, as far as they're concerned, it doesn't matter who he is. They want to win their case. And Nikhil Gupta, as part of the Indian D team that attempted to violate U.S. sovereignty by, hiring an undercover DEA agent to kill Pannun, like they want to win that case. And clearly in Nikhil Gupta's case, bringing up all of this stuff about Pannun also doesn't help because he was caught red-handed, right? And so I think, like, we have to kind of look at, there's this specific case, but there's also this broader government response. And that's actually what we're talking about, right? We're talking about the fact that, we've had a bunch of temples vandalized over the years, and what is the response the FBI and other government agencies have given us? How seriously do they take our concerns, right? And because, if you look here, what I see is, I see that undercover police work, intelligence, professionalized operations, they were able to thwart an attempted extraterritorial assassination, right? One that, to be clear, India has no right to violate U.S. sovereignty. If Pannun, whether he was engaging in speech, or even if he was plotting something, again, if it's on U.S. soil, that is the U.S.'s jurisdiction. It is none of India's business, right? If India wants to raise an issue with the U.S. diplomatically about it, that's fine. Right. And I get, how strongly Indians feel about this, but that doesn't give you an excuse to violate U.S. sovereignty. But, I think, we have to kind of take a step back and look at this and say, there was an investigation. They thwarted an act of transnational repression. You know what I don't see? I don't see any type of legislation or any type of things that required, any type of McCarthyist investigations, calling Indian Americans or Hindu Americans, Indian agents. Right. It doesn't require, like, this backdoor Trojan horse for expanding even more government power to surveil people for all sorts of things. So I think, we have to kind of take a step back and look at the bigger picture. And that is that in this case, the system worked. And if we really want to fight, transnational repression, we shouldn't be fighting transnational repression by repressing Americans. Then it just defeats the point, because then you're just like, okay, fine. I want to fight Indian transnational repression, so I'm going to give up all my civil liberties and let Uncle Sam, go through all my emails. Like,
Yeah,
that's a really false choice, and that's a really shitty choice, and we shouldn't. That's not a choice we should be
Well, and
making.
Uncle
yeah.
Sam doesn't know the difference between a Hindu and a Sikh.
That's true.
Yeah,
Rest of our lettuce,
you know,
call
yeah, a couple things I think Raj touched on that I want to follow up on. One was, man, if you're gonna do a job, fucking do it right too. I mean, that's the other thing is like, why did you send such a sloppy person to do the job? And again, I'm not advocating that should have been successful, but come on, I mean, that was like worse than the D team. It's like
Yeah.
No,
it's
I
like when you
know.
walk into a strip club in the middle of the day, you get like the worst dancers that are there, right? You got to go to like prime time at night to get the best dancers, not during the daytime, right? And that's like this kind of a operation, right? And you had like the daytime dancers that were a part of this operation. So if you're gonna do it, we can do it right, right? So if you're gonna have somebody indicted, at least be successful in your operation. So like,
Yeah.
I mean, shame on India, whoever was kind of like ordering this hit or whoever was involved in it for doing such a horrible, sloppy job.
The incompetence is truly offensive, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there was that one movie. What was that one movie that India came out with, like not Dehradun, Dune,
Dhurandhar.
that
Durandar.
Durandars. And, I mean, that clearly wasn't that. I mean, and like also like, can we just also talk about that Nikhil Gupta guy? Like he, like, when I actually saw a picture of him, I was like, oh, it was the Indian, that was the Indian agent.
He looks like a CPA. He looks like a CPA, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, like he had the
No
the
offense to
classic
CPA.
Indian anti-republic tilt, like the you know what I'm talking about, right? Like the classic Indian sedentary worker
I
anti-republic
know. I'm
tilt.
trying to
Like,
do it in my chair, but
He was not a very active or fit drug trafficker or arms trafficker.
Daniel Craig is James Bond. He is not.
no, you don't want to
okay.
see him in a speedo.
Yeah. I'm not sure, but well, okay.
Yeah, and not working at the strip club either. So I'm not going to tie those two. I think the second piece of it is, this bill now is going to be used by all these, our friends in the pro Khalistan world, like the Preetpal Singhs in Fremont and the Harjeet Singhs of Amazon fame, who is now talking to Pakistani TV about breaking up India. So again, lends credence to the Pakistan connection with the Khalistan movement. I don't think they used any of us to help bust this case. They didn't follow us. They didn't like hack into our systems. They didn't like basically determine that we were proxies and we were helping Nikhil Gupta in any way. And we didn't come in any way of like solving this case. So what's the need for all these pieces of legislation, right? I mean, that's, I think, Raj's point, and that's something that we're facing now, that now these pro-Khalistan groups and Khalistan sympathetic groups are going to go and just use this case as an example of why you need strength in laws. But what more is that going to add? Because this seems to have been a pretty good intelligence and criminal justice operation in foiling this. So it seems like we're doing an adequate job. Now, why do we need to go around like demonizing entire communities by adding additional trainings and additional, criminal penalties, et cetera, and trying to basically suppress, anybody that criticizes these movements as being proxies or agents of an Indian government, right?
Yeah.
There was nobody in the community that was involved in this case. So I don't understand like why there's a need for any of these bills or laws.
Well, it's not just the bills, right? They're like tagging the DOJ, they're tagging DHS and saying, investigate Suhag Shukla, investigate the Hindu American Foundation, right on the coattails of this, which actually precisely demonstrates the dangers that we have been highlighting when you try to bring what's a federal issue to the state and local level. That you're going to have, these kind of transnational movements now targeting Americans and misusing the law to forward their propaganda and whatever else they're doing.
Like, what Suhag said is absolutely true. Like, the more they call us Indian agents, the more, proof, there is that these types of laws will be used in ways that are not going to be helpful. They're not going to solve the problem. They're just going to turn people against each other, and they're going to put ordinary Americans, on the chopping block. They're going to have their civil liberties violated, and it's actually not going to protect you from anything. And if, but if you hate Indians or Hindus that much, and if you want to get that short-term gain and that certain little satisfaction of sending that little letter to Pam Bondi and having us investigated for FARA, like if that helps you sleep at night, fine. But it's really not going to solve whatever problems you think you have.
Yeah. Okay. So we try to keep these half an hour, so we got 10 minutes here. So two things. Can one of you...
Don't try to suppress my speech, Matt. Stop it.
Are you an Indian agent?
Yes, Matt, of all people on this team, is the Indian agent.
I'm the
Exactly.
RSS
That's
functionary.
exactly why they would
I'm
choose
the
him.
RSS functionary along with Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard, and Vivek Ramaswamy.
His real name is Matt Tinder.
That's like a bad Tinder profile name. What I was trying to do here is say, can somebody steelman the need for a transnational repression bill? Because we have this incident. We have Iran goes after dissidents worldwide. China was operating de facto police stations right around the corner for me when I lived in New York. So can someone steelman that? And also for listeners, viewers, outline, I believe there's a federal transnational repression bill making its way through or almost about to. So can we finish up with that? I don't know who wants to go for what.
Sure. I mean, I can talk a little bit about it. So, first of all, that issue of transnational repression, there's obviously involves much more than, whatever is going on from India, right? You have countries like China, Iran, Pakistan.
Russia.
And if you look at, other countries like, in Canada, there were some, people
Russia,
who were assassinated.
I mean,
Russia, lots of countries. And, while these like extraterritorial assassinations get a lot of the attention, the reason why a lot of times you get into civil liberties types implications is because it can go down to very subtle levels, right? So, for example, there is a delivery app that is, in China and Chinese in origin, and apparently there were some people in Australia who were complaining about sort of the, how that app was working, and then like their families back home get threatened, right? So that's an act of it's an act of transnational repression. Right? How is it going to happen? It is going to happen through people who may not necessarily act as official government employees, but they might message you on WeChat or WhatsApp or what have you. And then that is how that act of transnational repression follows, right? Another example could be like, and this happens a lot in the Chinese American community context, is you might have a demonstration where you have pro-Tibet independence or Taiwan independence people. And then you have a lot of Chinese people who are they sent there by the government, or do they just genuinely believe that Taiwan and Tibet are part of China, right? Both of those things are true. But the Chinese government obviously strongly believes that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China, and a lot of ordinary Chinese people do. But so when they show up in protest or counter-protest at, say like, at some event, are the Chinese people that are showing up engaging in transnational repression because they have a policy position that happens to align with the Chinese government? Or is it only transnational repression if the Chinese government sent them there? And if so, how do you find that out? Right. And how do you surveil? And, so that's where you get into these civil liberties implications, because you could have situations where you have one group of people that, are deemed to be the foreign agents because of the position they take, and the other group of people are deemed as the victims. And only, if they were to engage in a class, only one of them is guilty of transnational repression.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think the problem you have here is that when you broaden the definitions of transnational repression so widely, and then you also make the language so vague, then everything is transnational repression and nothing is transnational repression, right? So if the goal is really to go after true transnational repression, then the focus should be on the actions of foreign governments. But a lot of these bills, the actions are really focused on the quote unquote role of proxies, right? The role of use of agents or proxies in the US that are acting at the behest of, supposedly acting at a behest of the government. But what ends up happening is that you're kind of making the language so vague, then it's like, it's the equivalent of, just because you oppose a policy, now you're a fascist, right? So everyone's a fascist, everyone's a Nazi. Everyone is now engaging in transnational oppression, and every single act of questioning what a quote unquote dissident of a foreign country is doing is now considered an act of transnational oppression. So what are you actually solving? You're not really solving for the core problem, which is to stop the actions of foreign governments. If the true goal is to stop the actions of foreign governments, you need extremely narrow definitions of what transnational oppression is. You need to ensure that you don't create more problems and over policing of this issue, where you end up, basically suspecting of anybody or everybody from a particular community of collaborating with a foreign government or being an agent of that government or being a proxy and engaging in transnational oppression at their behest. So any bill that needs to, or any policy needs to be extremely narrowly tailored and needs to be very, it has to be very specific in its definitions. Otherwise, it's not going to solve the problem, and it's just going to create a whole host of other problems that perhaps for some were unintended, but I think for others were actually intended, right? So a lot of these Khalistan groups, they don't care about transnational oppression more broadly, right? They don't care if a Pakistani agent is committing an act of transnational oppression in the US. They care that it's basically anybody that is trying to silence Khalistani activism and Khalistani activities and perhaps fundraising and other material support for terrorism. That's what they care about. So their goal is not to stop TNR. Their goal is to basically stop any attempts to hinder or suppress or silence or suppress the Khalistan movement in the US.
Yeah.
Like they're willing to sacrifice the civil liberties of all Americans for their Khalistan. That's really what we're talking about.
I think also, pulling this at the state level, where we know, a lot of these organizations have embedded themselves in the progressive movement. And there was just that interesting article coming out of Texas where, the local parties are getting pulled away from actual local issues and dragged into these national agendas. And so, putting this sort of power in the hand of state law enforcement where they're ill-equipped, they don't have the access to intelligence, all of that stuff, I think is another argument against what we're seeing in places like California. I think there was still one more state that had pushed for a TNR bill. Was it Michigan? I can't remember. But anyways.
No, Michigan. Yeah, Michigan's different.
It was some state, I can't remember. But I think that this is an issue that's important. We should care about it as Americans, that we don't want foreign governments, infringing on American civil rights. But there's a proper place for that. And that, I think, is at the federal level, which is tasked with handling our foreign policy.
Right. So, but here, let's go to the federal level then, because there is a federal bill. What would such a bill do to actually prevent this that existing law doesn't do? Why have this beyond the symbolism of it? Not to denigrate symbolism. Symbolism sometimes important, but what
it would do nothing more.
Yeah.
It would do nothing more in the actual prevention or stopping of transnational oppression. On the other hand, it would do everything we've talked about that's a problem, which is creating additional penalties and basically criminalizing actions by private citizens in collecting information on the Khalistan movement or any of these quote unquote dissident movements or speaking out on it. And again, opening the door to accusations of being proxies, et cetera. And who's going to determine who a proxy is or not?
Yeah.
If a pro-Khalistan group goes in and says Suhag Shukla is a proxy of the Indian government, is that the basis of the information that we're getting? So who's the judge and the jury in this case in determining who's that? Is it these Sikh groups, extremist Sikh groups that are basically in the ears of some of these agencies and others that are basically whispering as to what the problem is and defining the problem? That's a whole host of other problems.
Yeah. I mean, we really have to be careful. I mean, we are in an era where there are so many ways, especially with technology, to further infringe on civil liberties and privacy, right? And, when we talk about these broad laws, and if we talk about proxies and just how a lot of these, these stories of transnational oppression play out, you're really talking about, this is really beyond just Hindu Americans or Indian. This is an American issue, right? We're a diverse country. We have diaspora populations from a whole host of countries that have fled persecution, that maybe their origin countries' governments have changed and now are hostile to them. You have all sorts of situations, right, where suddenly now you have ways for these diaspora groups to start using the government and using lawfare to basically define, an opposing side as a proxy, right? You are giving license to people who don't want anyone who is not of a certain background in this country. Now you're giving them license to call them foreign proxies, right? So the consequences of this, it's like, again, like India, let me make this very clear, for people. India has no right to violate US sovereignty, and I think India, like Nikhil Gupta, Yadav and all of those people, they owe not only do they owe the US American people an apology, they also owe the diaspora an apology for really screwing things up for us in very unhelpful ways. But, that should not be a thing where, we end up, creating a situation where everyone, pays the price, right? That is not fair to everyone. And, you shouldn't be passing laws on something that is so complex and so multifaceted based on moral panics, because that produces bad legislation and it's going to have consequences. And, most of all, it's not going to solve the problems that you want to solve.
Yeah. And again, look at the messenger. Who are the groups that are actually promoting these transnational repression bills and trying to get them passed? Are they actually, Tibetan, dissidents or others? Are they people that, from this former Soviet Union or, Russian expats or even Iran, and maybe a couple cases from Iran? But the vast majority are those that are proponents of the Khalistan movement. So you got to also, these legislators can't be so naive or so self-absorbed that they don't understand what the angle is here and what's trying to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, is Gavin Newsom an Indian agent for vetoing SB 509? I mean, I know some people, wonder that, but is his real name, what is it? Gavinder?
Govinder.
Govinder.
He's the governor. Is the governor.
Governor Singh. Yeah, no. I mean, honestly, there are a bunch of if you don't like us, fine. If you think that if it's easy for you to think that, HAF is called Indian agents because they're Hindu Americans and they're Indian agents, and then just wait till you're called an Indian agent, and then see how you feel.
And just for the people that think that we're making fun of Sikh or Punjabi names by throwing in the Inders, my dad has Inder in his name too. So just want to put out that disclaimer before we get accused of anything that we're not actually doing. At least for myself.
Okay, then. We're up about time here, Suhag. We've been very verbose. You want to close this
I
out
have
here?
nothing
Final
left
thoughts?
to say. I mean, I think we've talked about strippers, and I didn't know there's a difference between day stripper and night strippers in terms of their dancing abilities. So
If there's a lunch buffet happening at the same time or breakfast.
It also is about meth use. I mean, maybe the ones
have
are
nothing more to add.
Okay, then. Thank you all for watching. We'll be back.
Not to say that I've ever experienced that, by the way.
Yes. Yeah.
Really, man. Raj knows about OnlyFans in Canada, and we'll leave it there. See you guys later.